Okay, setting things up. We shall actually start in 2.5 minutes. I'm a stickler for punctuality. At my old age, it's difficult to change. Pastor Brunson was the cause of Turkey's lost currency crises, and I wanted to send my greetings wherever the holy man may be, because we're going to talk about the currency again. I'm really not interested in exchange rate forecasting, but I'm interested in the impact of a currency shock that's a sudden depreciation of the Turkish Lira on the Turkish economy. And events of the last few days forced me to revisit that sacred ground once again. The mistakes made by the Turkish officials are just unbelievable. These brought us to the precipice of a currency crisis, currency shock, currency event, whatever you call it. And this week will prove to be fateful. If we can defend the currency, well, then we can live to fight another day. If not, then there are very few options. And the economy, which has already been hit by the COVID-19 restrictions and the resulting collapse in demand, will be pushed further down the abyss. I shall take about 15 minutes or so, some of which would be storytelling. Real Turkey Channel is a very young institution. It has been around for less than a year, and some of our audience, our loyal audience, may wish to recall what happened in August 2018 and how it ended. Then I'm going to draw similarities to the events of the current episode. And of course, I would like to add a proverb of my own. History only repeats for the fools, and we will see whether it shall repeat for the Turkish administration. Okay, it's 3 p.m. Istanbul time. Hello, YouTubers. You are at Real Turkey Channel to watch another live broadcast by your presenter, Atilla Yeşilada. And this is Istanbul, his workroom. He's quarantined. We're in the last day of a 3-day lockdown period in Istanbul. I am making this broadcast to remind all of our audience, anyone interested in Turkey, that the Turkish lira is in jeopardy in the sense that we might witness a very rapid depreciation episode with very negative consequences on the Turkish economy. The title of this broadcast, Remember Pastor Brunson, is harking back to the summer of 2018. Allow me to tell you the story. I like storytelling. Pastor Andrew Brunson, I believe, lived in Izmir, a lovely Aegean town. He's an evangelical Christian preacher. First of all, I am neither Christian nor Muslim, more like a follower of Odin, so I hope I'm not confusing terms here or being offensive to anyone without knowing it. I have no intention of doing so. He has been preaching the gospel in Turkey for 30 years. We have a tiny Christian community. And as far as I know, he's a man of peace and a man of religion. But suddenly he was arrested on charges of aiding and abetting the Gulenist terror organization. Fethullah Gulen, who gave his name to this terror organization, is an Islamic preacher, a Muslim preacher who lives in Pennsylvania, and who I firmly believe has orchestrated the 2016 coup attempt, which was not successful. So, intelligence has associated an evangelical Christian pastor with a radical Muslim terrorist outfit. I didn't find that too credible. Neither did most of the legal experts. Why was Mr. Brunson detained? The most plausible theory is that essentially he was being kept hostage because our President Erdogan wanted to swap Brunson and others, their other American captives in Turkish prisons, for Fethullah Gulen. Do I have any evidence? Yeah, he said, give us the priest, we'll give you your priest. Actually, he didn't use the word priest, something that's a slightly more offensive or demeaning in Turkish language. Papas, monk, I suppose, would be a better translation, but doesn't make a difference. So, yeah, he wanted to swap Turkish, prisoners of American origin in Turkey for Mr. Fethullah Gulen. America refuses to extradite Fethullah Gulen, which I think they should, because to me he's guilty, but obviously I'm not a legal expert, but that's besides the point. I understand VP Pence and his wife are somehow close to the church of Mr. Brunson. Either they're in the same church or their churches are theologically very closely affiliated with each other. Anyhow, Mr. Trump involved, and you know how he gets involved. He doesn't make diplomatic overtures. He sent a Twitter saying like, I'll destroy you. Mr. Erdogan resisted for 6 days, during which the Turkish currency went from 6 something against the dollar to 7 something against the dollar. So it depreciated something like 20% over a period of 6 days. At the end, Mr. Erdogan relented, and the Turkish judiciary, which is of course completely independent, has decided that Mr. Brunson has served enough time in the prison for his crimes and ought to be released and sent back to his country. Of course, the United States dropped any sanctions talk, and the Turkish lira recovered very slowly. But while prices recover relatively fast, quantities don't. That's an essential rule of economics. It took 1 year to work out the Pastor Brunson effect from inflation data. That is, for 12 months, Turkish inflation raged above its trend because of this currency shock. So the currency shocks have very real and lagged and prolonged effects. 2, at that time, Turkish corporates had outstanding foreign currency debt of $210 billion, the Turkish lira value of which increased roughly 35% over a period of 1 year. Of course, their revenues didn't increase 35% over the same year. As a result, we had a bankruptcy and a bankruptcy protection wave in Turkey. I think in the United States, this is called Chapter 11. In Europe, it's called Concordat applications, protection from creditors. And the government had to change the law several times to bail out the companies. Nevertheless, the Turkish corporate sector was hollowed out. It was never the same again. So it's not the currency depreciation that I'm afraid of. I mean, in a freely floating currency regime, currency goes up, currency goes down. There are some short-term effects, some positive, some negative, but at the end, equilibrium is reestablished and not much changes. For the average American, Dutch, British, or German citizen, the value of euro or pound against the dollar or Turkish lira is 99% of the time irrelevant. They don't even bother to check it. It is important if they're going abroad to travel. Then if their currency is weak, they would complain about high prices in the country they go to. But essentially, currency appreciation or depreciation plays very little role in the daily life of a citizen of a developed country. It's exactly the opposite here. It affects everything. It affects the prices we pay for food, for gas, for heating, for movies. You know, if you want to watch a Hollywood movie, of course, you have to pay dollar prices, or our Netflix subscription. And of course, it affects our livelihoods in the sense that if corporations cannot make money, they can't make new investments and they can't hire new personnel. So one would think that ought to be a very severe lesson to Turkish administration, and they would not repeat the same mistakes. But unfortunately, they did the same mistakes again. And the Turkish lira depreciated by 15% against the dollar this year. Now, of course, for those of you who follow other emerging markets, could tell me, what are you talking about? The Brazil real depreciated something like 25%. The South African rand depreciated by something like 30%. I'm making up the numbers, but they depreciated much faster than the Turkish lira against the American dollar. There is one difference. Their monetary authorities did not defend the currency by selling dollars. Ours did. Calculations differ from one institution to another because our central bank is completely non-transparent about this issue. But over the last 12 months, our central bank may have wasted anywhere between $30 to $40 billion trying to defend our currency. As a result of which, it has run out of net foreign currency reserves. It still has foreign currency in its vaults, or in terms of paper assets, but these are actually the monies sent to it, given to it by our commercial banks as required reserves. Why has the situation suddenly become very alarming? Couple of developments. First of all, I'm really sorry. Our central bank governor, Mr. Murat Uysal, presented the inflation report, which is what the central bank is obligated to release 4 times a year by law. And the central bank has reduced its year-end CPI inflation target to 7.4%, which is Alice in the Wonderland. No one believes that. I don't think the central bank believes that. I checked surveys by Anatolian news agency Forex and the Turkish version of Bloomberg, both for this month, for April, and for year-end. Year-end forecasts range anywhere from 9% to 10.5%. There is no 7% there. So people started thinking, why this unrealistically low-ball estimate for CPI? And they immediately came to the conclusion that, central bank is going to cut rates further because our president wants lower rates. Knowing that rates are going to go lower, of course, this makes Turkish lira less attractive for Turkish depositors as well as for investors who arbitrage the interest rate differential between the Turkish lira and other currencies. If I know the Turkish lira is going to offer less interest, why would I stay there? I would go to a higher yielding country. So that was the first negative development. We have seen some outflows. Secondly, Turkey has been in search of swap lines. That's swap loans from either the Fed, American Central Bank, or IMF. But it appears the prior condition for obtaining those would be for Turkey to mothball S-400 anti-missile batteries it purchased from Russia. To recall, Turkey is a member of NATO, and neither the United States nor NATO are very happy about Turkey purchasing very sophisticated Russian weaponry, which incidentally also hacks into NATO weapons and eavesdrops. The only concession Turkey would make was that it would postpone activation of S-400s, but it has no intention to mothball or send back the batteries. So on Friday, in an Atlantic Council teleconference, the American envoy to Turkey said, this is completely unsatisfactory. We really have not received any guarantees that Turkey deal with S-400s the way we want it to be. So to the best of my understanding, there will be no swap lines coming from Fed or from IMF. That's not to say Fed would receive instructions from the White House. I mean, the Fed doesn't have any reasons to give Turkey swap lines anyhow, because it has rules, and one of the rules is the independence of the central bank, which it isn't in Turkey. But the prospect of swap lines was one thing that kept traders from short selling the Turkish lira. Now that that prospect is out of the horizon, we have seen short selling of Turkish lira accelerated. The third mistake the Turkish administration made is to defend a certain level of the exchange rate. They claim they are not doing that, but for the last 10 business days or so, the dollar TL rate has hovered around 7.00. Whenever it breached that level, there were sales by state banks to strengthen the lira again. I mean, this was the best kept secret in Turkey. Everyone would tell you, look, if left to its own devices, Turkish lira would go weaker or dollar would appreciate against the lira beyond the 7 barrier. But the central bank is defending the 7.00 exchange rate. I don't know why. I don't know what's magic about 7 or how it works into their econometric models. I have no idea. But it's a huge mistake. Try to defend an exchange rate, because then essentially you switch from a flexible exchange rate regime to a fixed exchange rate regime. And fixed exchange rates have been abandoned largely across the world by 90% of the nations, simply because you need tons, buckets full of foreign currency reserves to defend them, which our central bank doesn't. So on Friday, despite I suppose Americans call it Labor Day, here it's Workers' Day, whatever. It was a holiday. Despite sales of $300 to $500 million by Turkish banks, Turkish lira could not be defended against the dollar. It declined all the way down to 704, and then slightly appreciated to 702. But a major psychological resistance, as the technical analysts would call it, was broken. This is why this week is critical. On Monday, central bank and Turkish banks will attack the red line again to strengthen the Turkish lira. If they can push back the exchange rate to say 6.95 against the dollar, well, we will live to fight another day. If not, if despite intervention, dollar TL closes Monday and say Tuesday above 7, it would set several processes in progress. Every trader in the world would consider Turkish lira a weak target and start short selling it. That's a typical definition of a run on a currency. If you know it's going to go down, you are going to short sell it or buy options, put options to benefit from its weakness. Two, of course, Turks are very keen currency traders. Roughly 52% of the deposit in Turkish banks are in dollars and euros, so they follow the exchange rate very closely. If they sense that Turkish lira is about to topple, that is, depreciate constantly for a prolonged period of time, they're going to follow the trend. They're going to ride the surf. So they're going to be switching their savings from TL to the dollars or euros, which would accelerate the trend of Turkish lira depreciation. And finally, remember, as I've said, our corporates have a lot of foreign debt to pay. The current number is $170 billion in the next 12 months. And unfortunately, most of them have not hedged this debt, partly because they are not very sophisticated in terms of financial management, partly because hedging is sort of expensive in Turkey. So those companies which have foreign debt payments or interest payments coming up, say by end of May or June, may wish to protect the value of their loan or of their outstanding loan by buying currency at the spot. And then Turkey will have a second Father Brunson event. Is there anything we can do to stop these threats? Yeah, clearly. It has happened in the past. The central bank could raise interest rates. It will have to be quite substantial, at least by 500 basis points. That's 5 percentage points. But I think that would mitigate most of the pressure on the Turkish lira, not only because it would make Turkish lira more attractive to domestic savers and some foreigners, carry traders, but it would also signal that Turkey is ready to make the necessary sacrifices in terms of economic growth to defend its currency. Or we could swallow our pride and go to IMF. There are two ways we can tap IMF credit lines. The first, I think, is the easiest way. Corona credit. It has a different name, but I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with IMF terminology, so I call it Corona credit lines. And these are somehow a multiple of our annual payments or our quotas at IMF. But I figure we can get something like $10 billion from IMF, which would tide us over through May, and then, you know, we'll leave the rest to Allah. And the conditions for receiving these loans are not very onerous, I believe. The most permanent solution, of course, is to seek a standby treaty, but I don't think President Erdogan would do that. And of course, the final option is capital controls. That's like China, to impose some restrictions on the ability of Turks to transact in foreign currency or on the ability of foreign investors to transact in Turkish lira. All of these will unfold this week and will have to be decided by the end of the weekend. So for anyone who invests in Turkey, whether in financial terms or in terms of doing business, imports, exports, foreign direct investment, this is a critical week. And I would appreciate if you know anyone who does business in Turkey, and if you would share this video to make sure they understand the danger to Turkish lira. I want to thank you for watching our broadcast. Subscribe or share if you like the content, and stay home and stay safe. See you next week. This is Atilla Eşilara saying goodbye from Istanbul.